Welcome, fertility sisters, to the Tru Fertility podcast. I'm your host, Lea Nicole Trujillo, a wife, mom, and therapist turned fertility coach after a challenging 7-year journey to conceive. Join me for stories from those who've walked this path, tips for your fertility and IVF journey, and some fertility-related girl talk. So let's sprinkle some of that baby dust because it's time for Tru Fertility. Welcome to the very first episode of the Tru Fertility podcast. I'm your host, Lea Nicole Trujillo, and I am so excited to have you here with me today. I honestly never thought in my wildest dreams that I would be having a podcast, and so I am completely honored that you chose to spend your time with me here today. But this podcast is really for you. And it's going to be a mix of expert interviews and tips, personal stories from myself and others, strategies for the emotional side of fertility, and even exploring some fertility-focused pop culture and girl talk. But before we get into all of that, I thought it would be a really good idea for you to get to know me on a deeper level. For me to share who I am and how I got here. For you to know my personal fertility story. Now, although I've told my story many times, this time's a little different. I'm going to go deeper and share some things that I really wasn't comfortable sharing with everyone before. And I will warn you that I still get emotional telling it at times, so please bear with me on that. But my real hope for this episode is that you can see yourself in some of my story and know that you are not alone. If you're in the midst of infertility, I also want you to know that there is light at the end of the tunnel. So with that in mind, let's get into it. Now, before we get started with today's episode, I wanted to offer my listeners an opportunity to snag my free class, Triple Your IVF Success with Less Stress. Inside this free masterclass, you'll receive 2 simple tools that you can start on today that have been proven to triple your success rates when trying to conceive. These tools not only help you boost your fertility, but also help you feel better now. So if you're looking to get your baby in your arms faster, reduce the number of IVF rounds, and ultimately save money, time, and energy, this is the tool for you. Go to www.leanicolecoaching.com, that's LEANICOLE, coaching.com to grab this free class while it's available. So first off, my name's Lea, and I've always had a passion for helping others and also a fascination for how our mind worked. I also had an aunt growing up who I was pretty close with, and she had schizophrenia. And that also intrigued me and led me to want to learn more about, again, how our minds worked and psychology in general. I decided that the best route for me was to actually do school psychology. And the reason being is because I had always pictured myself having kids. And I thought that as a school psychologist, I would get at least the summers off so I could spend time with this family that I envisioned for myself. So that's what I did. I received my master's degree and started working for school districts, providing psychological support and assessments for all ages. Now, as far as my relationships went, I had not been married in my 20s. I had dated, I had boyfriends, and I, again, had not gotten to that point where I was in a marriage before. And at one point in my life, I was living in Austin and I was in a relationship with somebody for a couple of years. And I knew in my heart that that wasn't a relationship that was going to continue forever. And this was right around my 30th birthday. I remember starting to have some strange symptoms physically. I started to get really hot at night. My period was starting to become really atypical, meaning that it started getting really heavy, which was really strange for me. And I had always actually had a very regular cycle. I had never thought that there would ever be any hiccup in my having kids in the future. But again, I started to feel a little different. I went to my doctor's office and my regular gynecologist and shared with her what I'd been noticing. So she decided to run a few tests, one of those being AMH, also FSH, and a few others. And she let me know when those results came in and said that we needed to have an in person visit. Whenever you hear those words, it's always a little, you're always wondering, well, what do they have to say, right? I wonder what kind of news she can share with me about what's going on. So she let me know that my AMH levels, which is an indicator of your ovarian reserve, was really, really low for my age. Again, I was 30 years old and my AMH was at a 0.003. She let me know that if I wanted to have kids, I needed to do something and fast. At that moment, I felt like the world just stood still for a second. It was shocking. I, again, had no indication before that this would be a problem for me. And I just remember sitting in that office feeling shell shocked, not knowing how to move forward, not knowing how to handle this. It was a huge blow. And she just told me that the next step to preserve your chances of having a family was to immediately go see a reproductive endocrinologist. So she made the referral and I made an appointment. Now, I was feeling really desperate at that point in time. And desperation can cause you to make some poor decisions. And for me, that was deciding that this point in time may be the only chance I have to have a baby. Now, that reproductive endocrinologist was telling me that basically I'd have the same chance going through IVF or with using a medicated cycle like Clomid, based off of where I was at with my ovarian reserve. So, faced with that, I really thought that maybe trying to have a baby with my boyfriend at that time was the right move. I thought to myself, well, yeah, it's not the best relationship, but maybe this is God's plan for me, right? So I got the Clomid as he suggested, the doctor suggested, and we tried. We tried for one cycle and nothing happened. I don't know, it didn't really feel right, but I felt like I had no other choice at the time. It was finally time to take a pregnancy test, and the result was negative. Instead of feeling a huge amount of disappointment, I actually felt some relief, but it also let me know that it was time to move on and to end that relationship. He's a great guy, but in retrospect, we really weren't meant for each other, and I really wasn't happy. And I can't imagine now looking back raising a child in that type of, relationship and that type of home. So again, the relief was warranted. So that brings me to a new situation and a new path in life. I was newly single. I knew that I had this huge fertility issue weighing on me, and time was an issue. So I wanted to do at that point what I could to try to preserve my dream of having a family. So I went to a new reproductive endocrinologist, a very reputable one, to freeze my eggs, to look at freezing my eggs. And that's when for me, all of the research started, right? I started reading so much about FSH, AMH, medicated cycles, all of that stuff. And so much so, the doctor even asked me if I was in the medical field because I just had the lingo down already at that point. I was just a girl on a mission, right? He shared with me that, yeah, based on where I was at, there wasn't a great chance that I would do well with an IVF stimulation round, but that obviously this was important to me and that we would give it a go, right? So I went forward with that. I got the medications And mind you, I guess I want to spend a moment there because deciding to move forward when you're completely single, it can be really scary, right? It's a lot to face this, what feels like huge cloud over your life alone, right? And to think about all of the aspects and the ways that it can affect you, like financially, that's a huge thing to take on as a single person. And then additionally, like just physically, I didn't have anyone to support me at that point in time as far as helping with getting medications or taking the injections or anything like that. And yeah, just again, emotionally, like I at that point in my time in my life, I was not comfortable sharing very much of this with a lot of people. So like my immediate family knew, and a couple of my friends, and that's pretty much it. So I went ahead and got the medication. I started getting ready to do these rounds, to do this round. And I also started trying to again reading a lot more. This is my first time reading the almost cult favorite book, right? It starts with an egg. And started reading more about that and started trying to again get my body what I thought was in a good shape or try to prepare as much as I could before that particular round. And honestly, I didn't have much time to prepare. I maybe gave myself a month. So I began the cycle, was doing the injections, and I was actually on a really high dose of medication. Again, based on where I was at with my levels, they thought that that would be the best route to go for me. And we started doing the monitoring and everything, and I wasn't having much luck with it. They were not seeing follicles developing. And at my last monitoring appointment, there really was only one that was in somewhat adequate size. So the decision was made at that point that the cycle would cease and we weren't going to make it to egg retrieval. And after going through all of that and feeling like this egg freezing cycle was basically like my only hope to hold on to the idea of having a child in the future or having a family in the future, it was really hard to not have a successful cycle with that. It was a huge hit to my heart. And I remember at the end, like when they were telling me that this wasn't going to work, there was a doctor there, and he was an older man. He wasn't my regular doctor who saw me that day, but he told me something that really stuck with me. And at that time, and it still brings tears to my eyes because it's, I don't know, I guess it just really affected me. But he told me that one day you're going to find somebody who loves you so much and you're going to bring so much joy to their life, which is a weird thing for a doctor to tell a woman, right? Especially a reproductive endocrinologist that didn't know me prior. But it was exactly what I needed to hear because it was so hard for me to think about struggling to conceive while being a single woman, right? I really had it in my mind that this was going to be a major barrier for me to share my life with somebody, for somebody to want to be in a marriage with me or commit to me, especially if they wanted to be a father at some point in their lives. So again, that was a major like hurdle for me mentally, but I did keep putting myself out there and I met this amazing guy eventually. And he seemed to have all of the qualities that I had been looking for. He was super nice and still and is one of the nicest people I've ever met. And after a few months of dating him, I knew I needed to come to the table and share with him that, hey, like I have infertility and it's going to be really hard for me to have children in the future. And to be honest, I don't know if I can. I was I was terrified to have this conversation with him. But I knew in my heart that that was the right thing to do and to give him at least that understanding and knowledge of what he would be stepping into if we were to continue in a relationship. So I did have that conversation with him and he responded beautifully. It honestly felt like it wasn't that big of a deal to him. he seemed up for whatever would come our way if we ended up being together. So I felt honestly really validated at that moment that I am more than just my fertility. Our relationship continued to flourish and we eventually got married. Now, after we got married, we were not as careful as we had been before about trying to prevent any pregnancy. But to be honest, I also wasn't actively trying in a way. I guess I also had it in my mind that there was kind of no chance that I would get pregnant anyhow. So why even try? So I didn't do any sort of like tracking or like, basal body temperature monitoring, ovulation monitoring, anything like that. And even at some points, I had even been on birth control because, again, like when you have such low AMH levels, you're basically perimenopausal. And I had all of those symptoms like hot flashes and all of that stuff, which is no fun. And I needed some extra like hormone supplements. And so my doctor at that time just thought it'd be the easiest thing for me to be just on the pill to help regulate my hormones. So after a year of being married, we decided to really put this, starting a family thing into full gear and wanted to meet again with a local reproductive endocrinologist. We had moved cities at this point. And so we had that initial meeting. They ran my numbers again. And I was really, again, I was already kind of at the very lower limit of any sort of AMH levels. So I was pretty much right where I was before, 0.003. So that's where I was at again still. And this particular doctor was kind of saying, like, okay, do we want to try the IVF route? Or do we think maybe you'd be a better candidate for donor eggs? So that was still a big question for me. So we decided he had suggested actually that we could trial with some hormones to see kind of how I responded. And the hormones also doubled as a mock trial. A mock trial is kind of just seeing how your body responds to hormones, particularly looking at your lining growth. So we decided to go that route. He was really looking at to see if balancing one aspect of my hormones would lower my FSH, which was really high. I think it was like 78 at that time. And so we started trying going through that mock trial. Now, at the end of this trial, we did another test. And honestly, there was a slight adjustment to my hormone profile with the FSH, but not enough to the point where he thought that IVF would be fruitful for me or would be a good option for me. It was very likely that I would get the very same results that I had the first time with my round with freezing in my attempt to freeze my eggs. So that was not fun news. And, I was kind of faced with the fact that I don't think IVF is going to work for me with using my own eggs. He did, however, share, though, that my lining was able to grow to an adequate amount, although it was slightly on the thinner side. So with that, we had some thinking to do. I talked with my husband about, kind of his thoughts on moving on to donor eggs and if that was something he was comfortable with. And I really had to do some deep work then and see if that was something that I could handle. I had to really spend some time grieving with the idea of not having a biological child and think if that was going to be the right path for me. I even had to write a letter to this imaginary biological child and let them know that, I'm sorry it didn't work out, that almost breaking up with them in a sense, right? Like, I'm sorry this dream of mine didn't come true. I'm sorry, you weren't able to be here with me, but I'm going to have to let you go in order to make space for a potential donor egg baby. I knew, I guess, also in my heart that my desire to be a mom was more than the desire for a genetic link. And I think also I had it in my head too that I just didn't think I could go through rounds of IVF and knowing that my chances were so, so slim for success. I just didn't think I could do that to myself mentally, physically, and financially, to be frank. And so, with all of that in mind, yes, I decided to go forward and see what donor eggs were all about. So I went forward with, looking at some of the different donor egg banks. For me, I personally thought that it would be better for me to choose from a wider array of people rather than somebody that might be local. So I just really wanted to see all that was available to me. I wanted somebody who I felt like I could relate to, somebody that I felt like was like me. I wanted somebody physically who looked like me to a degree, and also somebody who I thought we shared maybe a similar interest and similar values. And in going through all of the list, and mind you, I will share that it is kind of strange to just see a bunch of like women out there that could be your future child's genetic mother, right? And having to go through their profiles and seeing what they like, what they don't like. It's almost like a dating website. I guess I kind of feel like it's similar to that. But just again going through and then seeing learning about all of these beautiful women from around the world that again might be somebody that is playing a huge role in your life. So I stumbled across one profile, and this particular woman, she kind of shared a lot of physical characteristics with me. Ethnically, she's Hispanic. I am also Hispanic. And she had actually some similar jobs in her past that I'd had when I was younger. And on top of it, she said that her goal in life was to specialize in psychology and she hoped to work with children. And as I shared with you before, I actually had been a practicing school psychologist for many years. So I just felt like that was super uncanny. And on top of that, she actually lives in Chile. And for some reason, I don't know why, I've always had this weird fascination with that country. Like, I really looked heavily into living there for a period of time, doing some sort of immersion program there. Unfortunately, it didn't work out, but okay. Another what I thought was a huge clue for me to choose her as a donor was that for some reason my husband had always loved the name Santiago for a boy if we were to have one. And the woman, when I looked up her information, it said that the fertility clinic that she worked with was actually in Santiago, Chile. And with that, I was like, yeah, this is definitely meant to be. Like, she's our donor. And I felt really confident choosing her. So now that we had a donor, we moved on to the next steps. And that included, again, using my husband's sperm to fertilize the eggs and, get that process going. So we did go through that. We had 8 eggs to start with. And through the whole process, the IVF attrition process, we ended up with having 2 blastocysts. Now, I didn't do PGT testing. My donor is younger than me, so I felt comfortable, leaving it at that. And I started getting prepped for a transfer. I started doing medication to thicken my lining and I started again trying to eat healthier and get really ready for this next step. So we moved forward with the transfer and I remember just feeling like really nervous, but also excited. The next couple of weeks were, of course, ups and downs, thinking, is this going to work? I started to feel some physical sensations. I held off on 8 days to take the pregnancy test, which, again, if you've ever done a 2-week wait, that can feel like an eternity. But I went ahead and took it, and I was in complete shock to see that it came back positive. I felt like I was going to faint, and I ran to the toilet because I immediately felt nauseous. I was just so overjoyed that this worked, right? And I immediately told all of our friends, family, so excited. And a few days later had my first blood test with my clinic, and they confirmed that it looked like a great number and everything was on track. Well, a few days after that, I ended up getting, a second blood test, which is pretty standard in any clinic. And my second blood test did not go so well. They let me know that the numbers had dropped significantly and that this pregnancy was coming to an end. That for me was the hardest thing that I have ever gone through. So, for any of you guys who have miscarried, lost a baby, I feel for you so much. Again, nothing could prepare me for that, and nothing has hit harder. I wanted that baby so bad. And for it to be there and then be gone the next was just so much. And it was after that that I really started to get into a bad place mentally. Not only could I not in my head conceive with my own eggs, I also possibly couldn't conceive or carry a pregnancy. So I felt like my whole world just crumbled at that moment. And I felt like I was starting back at square one. Now, after this time, I had some more testing done, and they ended up determining that I actually had additional medical conditions going on that could be also impacting my fertility. Specifically, I had a large fibroid. They didn't think it was impacting me initially because it was on the outside of my uterus, but they wanted to move forward and get a better look at it and possibly know if they wanted to remove that. So we did do an MRI, and that came back that actually they found that I had something called adenomyosis. And it's related to endometriosis, but it's basically like muscle is growing into your uterus. And they thought that that could be affecting my ability to carry. Additionally, I had asked my doctor I had pushed my doctor to check my prolactin levels. I had read some research and thought maybe I had some of those symptoms. She did do that as well, and that came back high as well. And so I then needed to take some medication for both of those to give me a better chance at my next transfer because I did have one embryo left. Now, the medication that I needed to take for the adenomyosis actually takes 3 months to work. Now, if you are struggling to conceive, you know that 3 months, again, feels like 10 years. I had already waited, I felt like so long to start this family. I felt like any delay I had was just way too much. And I wanted a pregnancy or the attempt to try for a pregnancy sooner than later because I thought that that would help take away the pain that I felt from my miscarriage. I now know that nothing can take the place of that. And honestly, though, now in retrospect, that 3-month wait was the best thing that could have ever happened to me because it gave me the time and space that I needed to really start to heal my emotional wounds around fertility. I started doing a host of things. Again, psychology is my background. And I had started learning more about like positive psychology techniques and started really trying to apply them to myself to pull myself out of this hole that I had been in. I started gratitude journaling. I started learning more about fertility yoga. I journaled. I did visualization work, and I started learning more about meditation. And slowly but surely, I started to come into a much better place mentally. I also started to share some of my story and what I had been through by joining support groups. And I also reached out to a therapist who had specialized in miscarriages and shared where I was at with that. And she helped me as well. And finally, 3 months down the line, I again felt so confident about this next transfer. I was happy, I was excited, and I had this knowing that this was going to work this time. And to be honest, I love my doctor so much, but she was trying to tell me, like, okay, well, if this doesn't work, next time we can do X, Y, and Z to better prepare. And I stopped her right in the tracks because I was like, my mind is set that this is going to work. And at this point in time, I don't want to hear about any other options. And so we went forward with the transfer. Again, felt like a long 2-week wait. We did the numbers and I was pregnant again. And instead of telling everyone at this point, I did tell some of my closer family and friends and waited until the next blood check. And we did the second blood check, and it turns out I was still pregnant and the numbers were looking really, really great. Now we moved on and continued, and I was so blessed to have a healthy pregnancy. And at the time of this podcast that I'm recording it, I now have an 11-month-old daughter, and she's amazing. And I am so grateful for this year. But aside from just being grateful for her, I'm also grateful for this experience because it has taught me to learn the strategies and tools that are going to help me throughout my life. I have never felt stronger than I have in this moment. And it's also opened the door to this amazing career that I am in complete love with. So, in case you don't know, I do fertility coaching for other women who are trying to conceive, and I specialize in the emotional aspect of it to give you that support that you need for the long haul of this journey. I know it's hard. I know it feels sometimes there is no hope, but I promise you there is. And I provide you with research-backed tools that I personally have used and have witnessed in my career working with other women, that them being successful there as well. So I invite you to take a look at that. I do have the link of that in the show notes below. And as far as where I'm at now, will I want to try to have another child in the future? Possibly, right? I'm still enjoying this early time with my daughter right now. Am I completely healed from my infertility journey? I don't know if anyone ever really is, to be honest. But I do know that I at least have some tools and supports to help me when I need them. And as far as the donor egg journey and process, that's still something that's evolving, but I'm happy to have you guys here with me on this journey. Thank you for allowing me to share these stories, information, and tips with you, or really just allowing me to connect with you on a subject that's so dear and important to your life. I really hope that somewhere out there I was able to reach one of you and to let you know that, again, you're not alone on this journey. Please make sure to subscribe to the podcast and do me a solid and share this with your friends or anyone that you think might benefit from hearing this. Also, I'd love it if you could leave a rating or review from wherever you're listening. If you have any questions or you want to share anything about what you heard today with us, please leave a comment on YouTube or Spotify. And for a deeper dive on today's episode, bonus content, and to connect with others in this space, I invite you to join Tru Fertility Tribe Facebook group. And last but not least, let's be friends on Instagram where I post almost daily. You can find me at Tru Fertility. Wishing you all baby dust. Till next time. Bye.